without any further ado, I want to step into our first speaker, Paddy or Patrick. Thanks for joining us. Why don't you take the stage and tell us about what's new with Azure in the region and a little bit about Arc and Lighthouse.
Right. Thanks everyone. Just want to check you can see my screen.
Sure can.
The right slide up, the right slide deck. So you've got the Azure hybrid slide.
We do.
Hey, thanks everyone for joining. I appreciate your time and interest in today's event. It's great to see this community building and seeing everyone come together. So big thanks to the whole team here. It's fantastic to see. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Paddy Quesnel. I'm currently the Asia Pacific Azure Hybrid Product Lead. I was up until recently the New Zealand Azure Lead, and just picked up this new role about 3 months ago, and have finally managed to offload that to the new chap called Zeus. And so my role was newly created because of Microsoft's focus around hybrid. And while we've sort of, as an organisation, sort of had pretty strong hybrid offerings through networking, DevOps, and of course our Azure Stack portfolio, we felt that we wanted to try and really get after this part of the market where, based on a lot of the data we were seeing from various, I guess, analysts and houses, that hybrid and multi-cloud was becoming more of a reality than ever. So I'm just going to sort of touch you through on a couple of points, and then sort of show you some of the products that have launched and gone live and what's coming, and how that probably provides a bit of value for you as partners in the community, particularly if you're managing customers who are running on premises, as well as maybe Amazon and Google and also Azure. So how you can sort of maximize that opportunity for you as partners. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. If you've got any questions, just whack them in the chat, and we'll probably take some at the end, I think was the plan, wasn't it?
Yep.
So yeah, cool. So basically, you know, we're seeing that hybrid and multi-cloud is definitely a strategy, and I think, you know, while we'll always be pushing public cloud as the best of breed and best practice in terms of getting the most for your organizations to modernize and innovate, the reality is that not everything can go to public cloud, particularly legacy applications, and there could be stepping stones for organizations to take as they work through that journey. And what we're seeing is sort of, this is some research out of sort of a bit more local in terms of APJ coming out of IDC, which really says that there's probably a percentage of the market that will go into sort of a single cloud environment, and then the rest are going to go to multi-cloud / hybrid cloud, and their biggest challenge is interoperability and management of those environments. And they've got pretty common sort of areas around disaster recovery and security and management and application performance, etc., that they're worried about, and that's why they're going down that track. So all of this points in the right direction in terms of how Microsoft is thinking about hybrid and going forward. And what I'm trying to urge everyone in the market to think about is that Microsoft isn't thinking about this as an or solution to public cloud. It's part of the right cloud solution for customers. So it's moving away from, you know, pushing really, really hard on just public and saying, okay, what's working, sitting down with partners and with their customers, and actually realizing, you know, and choosing what the right cloud options are for organizations as they evolve. And that's primarily because environments are evolving quickly, but also running hundreds or thousands of apps across lots of different infrastructure, and whether we like it or not, across different public cloud providers as well. So that's the reality. So when we looked at that, we sort of thought about, well, how can we meet the market in that sense and be a little bit more customer centric, I suppose. Not the saying that we weren't, but I think what we're bringing to the table now certainly meets that. And then, of course, we listened to a lot of what you as partners were saying out in the wider community, and this. You know, I probably wouldn't say that hybrid necessarily causes pain for partners, but it makes it a little bit more difficult. We're hearing sort of like certainly the managing customers across multiple estates is complex, and when you start adding in edge devices, various public clouds and various on-premises, and then you take in other solutions from various hardware providers, then it all of a sudden becomes a myriad of complexity and, as I said, interoperability challenges. And of course, then you get into sort of different tooling and different expertise, trying to separate sort of manual patching, deployment, backup, high availability, disaster recovery, and then how do you, I guess, react to customer needs around DevOps practices, practice of CI/CD pipelines, and try not to make that too consuming for you as partners who are maybe managing and providing those services. So it's all about simplification, I guess, in a word. And one area they haven't really touched on at all is around this whole management, security, and governance of the estate, and how making that simpler and easier to evolve to. So this is a slide that primarily talks about our product Arc, which I'll get into in a second. But I like to use this as a positioning statement in terms of how we're thinking about Azure, as I mentioned before. So the concept is what is the right cloud option for the organizations that you're dealing with, whether they're customers or maybe you as partners for yourselves, because the reality is that customers have got edge devices, they're running IoT, they're running different data center infrastructure, they might be running some of the stack solutions that we've got running, and then you've got different public cloud options through AWS, Google, and of course then you've got VMware, IBM, Red Hat, multiple instances of different vendors and organizations. So how do we provide this umbrella view to okay, public cloud where you can go as an organization, but then, okay, how do we help you with your other areas of your estate to simplify and help you modernize and leverage public cloud capabilities, but bringing it to you in those other estates that you're managing. And that's the context that we're trying to set here, is it's not just one option. That's probably one thing I sometimes hear people say, the answer is Azure, what is the question? And so it certainly moved away from that, from the old days. And so what I'm talking about is Azure Arc. You've probably heard about this, and really for us, this is a fantastic way to provide a single control plane for your customers that maybe you're managing, or for your customers who are managing their own environments. Because what you can use Azure Arc. I want you to think about it as a window for you to be able to manage, govern, and secure, first and foremost, that entire estate, whether it's, I said, on-premises, edge devices, public cloud, and any public cloud. So it becomes holistic and agnostic in terms of how we apply it. And then enabling the next stage is to then, how could you bring public cloud capability to the edge, to on-premise infrastructure, and if you wanted to bring Azure services to AWS and Google. So it's very, very much an agnostic view. So think of it as this, I like to sort of think about it as bringing public cloud down to where you need it and where you can, to be able to maximize the innovative services. So we'll talk about that. So there, at the moment, you'll see out of market, these are the sort of three areas that we've talked to at various events. I think we've got Build coming up, and then we'll have Ready from a partner perspective, and you'll see constant evolution of Arc in terms of where it's going on a roadmap. But at the moment, it's the core value proposition for you as partners to organizations is the simplification of management and government and security consistency across that entire estate, regardless of what it is. And then in public preview now is bringing Azure Data Services and Azure SQL down onto on-premise infrastructure, what I'll talk to you about in a second, because not downplaying your technical knowledge or abilities, but most people I talk to about it, sometimes it takes them 2 or 3 times to kind of compute what I'm trying to say. And then what's available now is be able to help organizations build cloud-native apps anywhere at scale using GitOps and Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes services. So basically meaning you can use DevOps techniques to deploy and manage Kubernetes apps at scale, and you can have a choice of your Kubernetes distribution. As I say, it's not just all about AKS, it could be OpenShift or just Kubernetes clusters, and then using Arc to centrally manage and delegate access for DevOps roles and responsibilities, again, keeping your consistency in that configuration, your policy settings, who's allowed to do what, and of course your security. So the one I'm going to talk to you about as a sort of a next stage, this is in public preview at the moment, so it's still technically free. We haven't got finalized pricing yet, but what you will see is this will go GA very shortly. So our first value prop I mentioned, management, governance and security. That's a great value proposition for customers running multiple infrastructure estates. But for me, this one is pretty exciting. And when you look at the slides, you go, oh yeah, okay, so what does enabling data services mean and bringing Azure SQL Managed Instance and Postgres to any hardware in any Kubernetes cluster? I'll probably give you more of a scenario and using this slide as a context. So think from the bottom up, you've got a customer who's running SQL 08 on Lenovo's hardware, as an example today, or maybe it's going to be VMware, and they're not modernized, they're still paying for extended security, or perhaps they're not, and they're worried about security risk. And they want to modernize, but they can't get that workload to public cloud. So what if we could bring SQL Managed Instance to that on-premises infrastructure using a Kubernetes cluster, which means you're modernizing the SQL estate, you're keeping the data where it is, and therefore the apps connected to it where it is, running on that hardware, but you're bringing SQL Managed Instance to that hardware, running on Kubernetes clusters, and therefore when you're running SQL MI or SQL Managed Instance, then you're getting those ongoing security patches and updates that you no longer have to worry about. So you're completely modernizing the database and therefore potentially the application because of what you're able to do with the PaaS services you're bringing down to any infrastructure. So as you can see here, you've got your hardware at the bottom. It doesn't have to be on-premises hardware. It can be Stack HCI or Cloud, Google Cloud or Amazon on the EC2 SKU. And then you run the Kubernetes cluster on top of the hardware. You run the data. You make sure you've got Azure Arc enabled across that hardware. So you turn on security settings, Azure Monitor, backup, HADR, etc. And then you bring your data services through SQL MI or Postgres down onto that cluster of Kubernetes, and then you can run your applications, etc., and get those data insights for your customers. So I hope that kind of makes sense, but ultimately it's thinking about bringing SQL PaaS down onto on-premises is probably the first thing, which is a great way for customers to modernize, get the ongoing security and patches updates. If they've got software assurance, they could therefore use Azure Hybrid Benefit to migrate that to SQL MI and no longer pay for the licensing, which reduces the cost even more. So there's lots and lots of benefits for a customer to be compelled to go down this track. So that's going GA pretty soon, but you can fool around with it now. There's no pricing out yet, but it's not required. So when we're thinking about Arc and the pricing model, that's always the one that is a bit of a question I get is, think about customers, servers, and environments at the bottom. You run Azure Arc as a solution for the customer's environment, which is free. Set up your customer's control plane. You're tagging your your role-based access controls and activity logs. That's all free to use Arc. So think of Arc as the enabler. And then I would probably go to the top first rather than this enabled services, where you can turn on Azure Policy, Monitor, Azure Defender, Security Center, Sentinel, backup, etc., and start to provide insights to your customer for their environment on performance, security settings, have that consistency of that governance, that management and security ongoing. And then, as I said, from there you could start bringing on some other capabilities with SQL Managed Instance and Postgres. So this model here is sort of like a Contoso managed service provider concept, pretty much the same thing as I've described. Use Arc to set up your Azure policy, your customers' Azure policy and update management, particularly if they're already on Azure. That means you can start applying that across the org, but it's not much to get that set up. Use that best practice that we advise to get customers set up with Azure Policy and Azure Monitor, and then slowly move them into, or as soon as you feel comfortable and the customer's comfortable, to the other capabilities around security and Azure Policy settings and update management, and then start to provide those modernized and innovative solutions that I've talked about. One thing you might have heard about is Azure Lighthouse, or you may or may not. A lot of people haven't. This is basically aimed at service providers who are managing multiple customer tenants and subscriptions and trying to simplify the way that's done. Think of this as Azure Arc on steroids, because you can basically use Lighthouse as a means to manage multiple environments under that and simplify your operations, potentially reduce your OPEX. We've got research from Forrester, which has come out and suggesting that those partners that have used Lighthouse already, which partners like Datacom have already set up a solution called Beacon, that they can potentially save $2 to $3 million a year in OPEX just through simplification and ease of management, but also drive net new revenue for them as well because of the services you're able to apply to those environments. So the concept being you've got Lighthouse as the portal to therefore manage multiple customers. How does that work with Azure Arc? Well, pretty simple. It just applies to the customer's tenant and their subscription. So it just falls under that. And what you'll see with everything that we land going forward, it's all ARM template based, which means it'll be cloud native, the kind of solutions we run, and they'll be able to fit and be deployable through the Azure portal and therefore through the customer's subscriptions and tenants. A couple of partners have sort of come out with some great quotes, none of which are in the ANZ or APAC region that I'm aware of, but Avanade obviously are, but they're global. But certainly when you pair Lighthouse with Arc together, then it's all about expanding revenue opportunities, improving efficiencies, and really overcoming customer objections because of the proximity and flexibility with their workloads and helping them set them right and ready for modernization. And these are some of the partners that I'm aware of. I've put some of the ones from an ANZ perspective. I've chucked those in there. This was a corp slide and added in a few local ones. But these are some of the ones globally. If you wanted to talk to them, I'm sure they can give you some insight as well. So just to reiterate, the point here is what we're sort of suggesting is migrate what you can for your customers to Azure where possible. Help get them set up with your role-based access controls policy, move what workloads you can. If you can't move other workloads for various reasons, and you want to simplify the customer's environment to provide consistency in management and security, then deploy Azure Arc to unify those operations, and then modernize through bringing on Azure services to any infrastructure, like I mentioned, with building cloud native apps and the SQL data MI, or Postgres on-prem. And then the next part is to think about modernizing the infrastructure with our Azure Stack portfolio, which is a good segue to the next part of my chat. So you've probably heard about our Azure Stack portfolio from a Stack Edge and Stack Hub perspective. Stack Hub has been around for about 4 years. It's primarily aimed at disconnected options for organizations that can't be connected all the time or don't necessarily want to be. It's great if you want to build cloud native solutions with DevOps onto that estate. It starts at a 16 node piece of infrastructure and obviously can scale and connect from there. And then we've got Azure Stack Edge, which is all about which you can order through the portal, and you can bring AI capabilities to the edge and IoT devices. A great example of that is with organizations that are using cameras, security cameras, surveillance, etc., across like an airport, for example, and they want to bring AI technologies and data insights using the cameras, and by connecting this device to the IoT devices and using IoT Hub and a bunch of other solutions, they can get greater data insights around maybe where their traffic goes, what shops they're going to, change the way that they set up their airport in terms of maximizing revenues for the retailers and therefore maximizing revenue for the airport because they clip the ticket. So that's all those kind of things in terms of, as an example, as an MI or machine learning, AI capabilities. One you may not have heard of, which went GA in December, was Azure Stack HCI. And this is our hero offering now in our hardware play. It starts as a 2-node, 8-core piece of infrastructure. It's available through most of the OEMs that you know of today. And the great thing is it starts small but can scale big. It comes in various options. It has therefore also is great for stretch clustering across multiple sites. And we'll actually deploy, this is the real benefit is you'll be able to deploy Azure services onto this piece of infrastructure with Azure Kubernetes service, which also means that this is a Azure native solution. It's not, the difference between Stack Hub and Stack HCI is Stack Hub is cloud native, but it's not Azure native. So it means if you ever want to migrate customers off it to public cloud, it's a full migration. but if you move a customer onto Stack HCI, it's Azure native, meaning it's in any stage as a stepping stone. They might use it to then go to public cloud, then they can migrate off that a lot easier because it's based on ARM templates and the Azure portal. And so what this is Azure Stack HCI is an operating system that sits on top of the hardware. You activate it through the Azure portal. It starts at $10 per core per month, and obviously it's an OpEx-based model. Some of the OEMs have got an OpEx-based offering in market today as well. So you can buy them on OpEx, on CapEx based in terms of then building that into your managed service offering. And because it's so small in terms of that 2-node, 8-core starting point, it doesn't need to be multi-tenant because it will sit under the customer's subscription, and you'll be able to manage that through the Azure portal with Azure Arc. So these are kind of some of the scenarios where we're suggesting to organizations to use it for. If you're familiar with hyperconverged infrastructure, it's pretty big on, I guess, downscaling the amount of infrastructure you need because you're using software-defined networking and software-defined storage, reducing the amount of infrastructure you need in your environment if you're a hoster or a customer with your own environment. It's great for modernizing branch offices and I guess multiple office sites and providing stretched clustering. And therefore you can bring a lot of these VDI capabilities with Citrix on it. So basically anything that runs on a VM, Windows or Linux, or can go into a Kubernetes cluster will run on the solution, and then you can bring modernized solutions to this environment. Some questions we get around comparing to Windows Server. So this is, I guess you could say, Stack HCI is our new modernized operating system. Windows Server 2019 came out with a form of noise. But one of the real value propositions from moving from on-premises to modernized infrastructure with Stack HCI, as you can see down the bottom, is if you've got a customer running 08 or R2 Windows, you can move that to Stack HCI and get the ongoing extended security updates that you may not be paying for. That's a pretty good offering to help customers modernize.
Excuse me, did you say that you're getting updates that you're not paying for?
So if you mean in terms of ESU, sorry? This extended security one?
Yeah, I may have misheard you, but I thought you just said you could get security updates that you're not paying for.
Yeah, so today, if you, as an example, if you moved from on-premises to public Azure and you use Azure Hybrid Benefit to public Azure and you migrate those workloads, then you'll get ongoing security updates until that license is due for renewal. So at the moment, you'll know that Windows 08 is end of support and therefore no longer getting security updates. So you either pay for your extended security updates today, or the offering, which has been for about 2 years, is you could migrate that to Azure and get the ongoing security updates without having to pay for that because you've modernized and gone to public cloud. What we're saying is exactly the same scenario by moving to Stack HCI.
Thank you for the clarification. Thanks.
No problem.
Patrick, we had another question too in the chat. Will there be a difference on how this is consumed or licensed?
The Stack HCI? Was that what that was?
Going back to Arc, I think was the question, Paddy. There was a slide on that, sorry, Kat, where you basically, there's layers to that.
Yeah, so it's all deployed via the portal. So it's not a license as such. It's just, I think you were meeting this slide.
Yeah, you did have a slide that summarised the pricing. So Sarika, the Arc control, or management control plane, no cost. But then if there's certain services like pushing SQL down to your equipment as a managed instance, then there can be add-on costs.
Yes, and those, I think the question is that these are all just standard Azure billing prices. All right, so there'll be standard Azure prices. There will be differences though for, say, SQL MI, because you're using the customer's infrastructure. Therefore, you won't be paying for infrastructure and compute costs. So that's why the pricing hasn't come out yet, because we're not GA. But basically, your customer has their own infrastructure. So all Azure and Arc are supplying is the SQL Managed Instance capability, so the PaaS offerings and the ongoing updates and patches. But all the pricing for policy, monitor, defender, sentinel, log analytics, that's all standard Azure billing pricing.
Okay, so thanks, Patrick. What I'm hearing is that compared to how what we pay for the current, say SQL Pass, let me take an example specifically of SQL Pass, that yes. What we currently pay for that, there's going to be a little management fee on top. Is that right?
No, not really. So I think the Arc piece is free, right? What you're using Arc to do is bring the simplification and reduce risk of security and cyber threats through having consistent offerings across or multiple infrastructures. So you're simplifying that need. So I guess there's an additional cost for that, but there's huge return on investment and value proposition for a customer to do that. Right. And with the SQL piece, it's all about modernization, and again, and then reducing security and cyber threats, because you're modernizing from SQL on-prem. You're not paying for extended security, or maybe you are, but it's costing you a lot. So there's a piece there. You move to SQL MI on Kubernetes through Azure Arc onto the customer's infrastructure. Yes, there's a cost, but you're modernizing the environment, and you no longer have to worry about security updates.
Okay.
Thanks, Patty.
Thank you. Got that.
Thomas, I think you got another one.
Yeah, I do. Thank you very much for that. I'll lower my hand here. So I have to admit, a lot of this makes me dizzy when I think about Azure licensing and who's paying for what. But just like Sarika, I have a similar question of, it sounds like we're making an adjustment from 2 years ago, where we said, all right, everybody, you can have your clients in your own tenant space. What I hear you saying tonight is, hey, we can take that off your hands and bring it inside their client's subscription, and you'll just manage it from the console, but you won't have the responsibility for collecting fees, and you won't have the security responsibility anymore. We'll take that on.
No, that's definitely incorrect. The idea behind this offering is for you to build your managed services around that and encompass it within it, and that's what Datacom's doing with Lighthouse.
So where is it housed? Where is the housing around this? So like, if it's not in our tenant space, if it's in Microsoft's tenant space, and we're letting the
no, it's not in Microsoft's tenant space. It's in yours. Yeah. So you're talking about Lighthouse, Thomas.
So
I'm not really sure. I'm just trying to keep up with what I heard.
Patty, if I just interject for a moment, you only had a couple of slides to go. Let's get your if you don't mind, we'll just get Patty's presentation finished, and then we'll continue a little bit of Q&A. Because we're running for 2 hours, the plan is just to have a bit of an informal chat in between, allow people to take a quick break and take a stretch. My smartwatch was just telling me I should do that. But then we will do a more detailed Q&A, and I think we can talk a bit more about the difference between Arc and Stack Hub and HCI at the end, if people are interested in that Q&A, if you don't mind.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah,
that'd be fine. Cool. So look, this as a summary in terms of that Stack HCI, we sort of moved on from, bring your minds back to that from a Stack HCI perspective. This is kind of my favorite slide, because it sort of summarizes everything in one go from a modernizing infrastructure perspective. So you've got your various hardware ecosystem. There's over 200 solutions. There's an HCI's catalog, which you can look that up if you want. You've got the software layer that sits on top of that, which is Stack HCI. Incidentally, you could download that onto any infrastructure that is software-defined storage and networking capable. You activate Stack HCI via the Azure portal, and then you can manage, or then you can bring any VMs, Windows or Linux on top of that, and then run various other solutions that run in a Azure Kubernetes cluster. So SQL MI through data services, bringing AI and machine learning to the edge, or other containerized apps on top of that. And you manage that all with Azure Arc, have that consistency of that governance and security on the top of it. And if you're not using Arc, then you can use on the left here Windows Admin Center, and bring in the other Azure services for that hardware with Security Center, Monitor, and Backup and Site Recovery. Hope that makes sense. So really, just to summarize, I've got 3 slides to go, which I'll move on quickly. Is, like I mentioned, look to migrate your customers to Azure where you can. Hopefully you're already doing that, but maybe you can't move everything. Simplify the management and unified operations with Azure Arc for your customer, and activate your Azure policy and role-based access controls. Then start enabling and modernizing their environments across on-prem and various other providers with cloud-native apps, Azure SQL MI, and then look to modernize infrastructure with hyper-converged technology. That doesn't necessarily have to be in that order, but I would certainly think 0 and 1 would be the first 2. From a resource perspective, if you'd like to learn more, go to that link, aka.ms/Azure-hybrid-resources. I didn't make the link up, it's too long if you ask me. You can learn a lot more. You can download various offerings and learn about Azure Arc Jumpstart. This is an open community that's available. You can learn a whole lot of things around deploying Azure Arc. You can chat and talk about various other things, including your questions around Lighthouse.
Thank you, Paddy.
Thanks.
So, as I said, today's really just a bit of a run through of a few areas. And Paddy, look, we would love to have a follow-up session where we perhaps go into further detail around Arc and those other traditional stack components and the new HCI platform. Everyone, if you want to take a quick break, please do so. I'm just going to have a brief informal chat here with Paddy, and in 5 minutes we're going to seek to kick off with the next session, which is going to be Robert Crane talking about Office 365 and Azure security. So, Paddy, I think what you went through there is very exciting stuff. I've been recently having the conversation that the internet is finally becoming what I envisaged it might be 25 years ago, where it's really now starting to be at the reach of commerce broadly. It used to be really only within the reach of major enterprise. And I love seeing what Arc represents, where, 3-4 years ago, yes, you could do an Azure Stack if you're an enterprise and you could deploy it on your own kit as a standalone. Really what this is now doing is bringing a seamless control plane, whether it's to, Azure AWS, Azure Google Cloud, Azure, legacy on-prem Hyper-V or VMware systems. That's really it in a nutshell, is that Microsoft's seeking to help bring that control plane together, isn't it?
Take myself off mute. Yeah, that's exactly right. You've got it nailed in one, and then I think it's just, how do we help bring, like Satch's view is make Azure the world's computer, like Bill Gates' PC on every desk on steroids again, kind of.
Yeah.
And so how do you do that, right?
Larry, more than a decade from Oracle, Larry Ellison said there's only room for 7 computers in the world. And look, there's obviously some big public clouds coming out, but there's going to be a need for edge computing. There's some, interesting Australian organisations coming out, like leading edge data centres, no relationship to leading edge computers, and where organisations are going to be able to have this equipment sitting closer to them for those real-time apps, for the IoT, the cameras, like you said. I was pleased that you said Kubernetes about 1 million times in that presentation, because I always look at the word and I wonder how to say it. It's like canal. I was, is that right? Is it canal?
Yeah, that's the right pronunciation, yeah.
I was talking to Shiva yesterday, and Shiva said your name went off good. That saves me the incorrect pronunciation.
My name at school was Far. You put the two together, you'll work out why.
So, Paddy, Kubernetes, I think that's probably an area that the industry needs to get its head around too, this container concept.
Yeah.
You're new to the role, but that'd be great also, I think, to come back and have a session at some stage with the right person explaining where that fits into the roadmap.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got, I don't know if you've heard of Brendan Burns, but he was one of the founders of Kubernetes as a concept.
Mm-hmm.
and he works for Microsoft. So he helped us to build and deploy Azure Kubernetes.
Yes.
And made that a lot simpler in terms of its concept and how to deploy it and use it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we'll push AKS where we can. But as I said, you can use these solutions today on various Kubernetes clusters.
Yeah, and I mean, I think so. We, in what I do in our business, help businesses to Azure, and it was one thing a few years ago as to how do you move the workloads there, doing it in the same way, running the same operating systems. It's now the transition to the modern app and things that can't move and can move. And so really enjoyed having you on with us, Paddy. Hopefully you can stick around. As I said, everyone, the aim is to have a Q&A at the end. But I think really there's probably the scope for a deeper session on the Azure Arc. And you did touch on Lighthouse, multi-customer management, again, totally separate potential topic. So thanks again. We're going to move on now to our next presentation, and that is from Robert Crane.